Welcome to Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. This is episode 102. I am Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
So this episode we are calling Mud Dopin' Music. It's a history of the Woodstock concert. But first, a couple of items I wanted to do with the fellas here before we dig into our history topic for the week.
First of all, though, let's jump in since I'm hosting. We're in the atrium, Studio R. A little cool in the atrium today, but that's all right. It'll warm up.
A little overcast, but still a nice view here in the atrium. I always enjoy it. But we have a comment from YouTube on episode 58, What If Stonewall Jackson had Gettysburg? And it's from Aaron A. And he says, I search often for videos on what ifs, but it wasn't until last week that I found your videos. I don't know why YouTube didn't direct me to them. Great podcast. So thank you very much, Aaron.
Well, how about that?
Yeah, and so What Ifs is a regular feature in our history. We'll direct you to also What If on Frederick III that I really enjoyed. Yeah. And our What If on if Robert Kennedy had not been killed, which is another one of our favorite What If episodes.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's one of the things we like, because I think it's a different way for us to explore questions. We like we like to answer questions, and that's what a what if is. It's what does it mean if it went this way instead of the other way? But
yeah. What was the historical impact? Because we talk all the time about history is a thread. Well, what happens if you pull on a thread and it breaks?
That's right. Or it's a different thread that goes through there. All sorts of things like that.
And then also, listeners. We decided to start this recording session early today, so that gave us an excuse to visit our favorite breakfast restaurant, Biscuit Belly, this morning, and it was tremendous.
Oh my gosh, it was so good.
Well, it's the official breakfast venue of Snakes and Otters now.
It absolutely is.
It just is.
Yeah, I mean, they don't know that, but
that's okay.
Maybe our listeners will tell them. That's right.
It's so good.
So good.
And the best part, Francis had the biscuit equivalent of a hot brown. So listeners, if you're not from Kentucky, you don't know what a hot brown is. A hot brown is an open-faced turkey sandwich with bacon and cream gravy.
Right.
Biscuit Belly's variation is 2 biscuits, a ton of chunky turkey breast.
Like real turkey, not shaved turkey.
Yeah, it wasn't turkey breast either. It was just turkey. So it's not dry.
Yeah,
it's the dark meat. So it was that's kind of their thing, is they chicken thighs and turkey thighs, which gives it a completely different flavor.
Yeah, it was real chunk turkey, couple slices of bacon, and gravy all over it. And I guess she was the shift manager, maybe.
Presumably, yeah.
Came up to Francis and said, "Would you like more gravy?" So
our jaws hit the table.
That's right. I was about halfway finished. I'd eaten, because it's 2 biscuits and they're huge. I'd eaten one. I'm about halfway through, and she could see the plate's half empty. And she looked, "Would you like some more gravy?" And I'm thinking,
That's a thing.
That's a thing.
Francis's eyes got to be about the size of hubcaps. And he was like, "Why, yes,
yes,
I would very much like some more gravy." So that's now, I think, going to be a new Snakes and Otters catchphrase.
Yes.
That we're going to use at every opportunity, whether it's appropriate or not. Would you like more
Especially
gravy?
if it's not.
That's right.
Would you like more gravy?
I mean, I was handing her my plate. She goes, "No, I'll bring you some."
Yes. It's like, here, take it.
Yeah.
Load up.
That's right.
It's like Oliver Twist, right?
That's right. Please, ma'am, may I have some more gravy?
That's right.
Oh my gosh, she was wonderful, though.
She really was. She was.
Yeah. We sent our thanks to her and the kitchen staff before we left.
That's right.
Biscuit Belly's tremendous.
That's right.
Good.
Business owners, restaurant owners, you could learn a lot from just little things like that.
Well, and the food is so good. I mean, it's not like Waffle House where it's your basic stuff. I mean, you've got some more exotic breakfast stuff, which is mainly just variations on stuff you probably already know.
Yeah, and again, little touches. Homemade jam for the biscuits.
Yeah, homemade jam, yeah.
It was so good. And so biscuits, we had big plates of hash browns.
Oh my God, I ordered a side of hash browns, and it's officially a side. So I'm expecting 3-4 inches across,
something like you get through a McDonald's drive-thru is what you're expecting. Yeah.
No, it was like an 8-inch plate covered.
That's right.
Edge to edge.
He had to share, and I enjoyed it with my extra gravy.
Yes, and I had to ask when she came back at the end, just curious, are the hash browns fried with a little bit of butter? He said, oh, yes. I thought so. Oh my gosh, they were so good.
So that's about 4 minutes of the whole episode. They're discussing Biscuit Belly. So
it's
you mean a lot to us.
You do, and listeners, it's worth your time. If you've got one near you, stop in. You'll enjoy it.
Good Heine Brothers coffee too.
Yes, that's right. I'm not a coffee guy much, but yep, it was darn good.
Oh, I meant to make my coffee.
Nice, good hot Joe. It was good.
Yeah, cup of Joe. So okay. Woodstock.
Right, Woodstock.
The palate cleanse episode.
Yes, again, this year is mostly going to be World War II stuff, but here and there we're going to pause and do something different. And this one was one of my kickouts because the whole idea of it fascinates me. Again, it's this sort of baby boomer cultural touchstone, like where were you when Kennedy was killed? And every boomer claims to have been there, I think.
Yeah, all 45 million of them.
But hey, they did have an estimated crowd of over 400,000 people on a little bitty farm in New York. So August 1969, 3 days. It's billed as 3 days of, what was it, peace and music.
Peace and music, yeah.
And organized as a concert. And originally they were planning to make some money here.
Right. This is a capitalist venture to start with.
Yes, this was not meant to be all that it turned out to be.
Well, they expected maybe 50,000 people.
Yeah.
Which is huge because they'd done a similar thing in Florida the year before, and they got the same people. They got 25,000 for that, so they figured 50,000 this time.
Yeah, and all of a sudden, it struck a nerve and a chord in some fashion.
Right. It was a perfect storm of events, obviously, to get it to happen.
Yeah.
And, this was a major, 32 acts eventually played.
Right.
And a lot of famous ones. But what astonished me were the number of famous people that were invited that declined.
Yeah, no, if you look on the Wikipedia page is actually very good with all of this. It has got, tons of folks that didn't come.
Right. Either because they thought it was a lark, scheduling problems or whatever. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they turned it down. I bet they wish they went afterwards.
There's a festival in Europe, I think, at the same time, too. Some of the acts played there, but...
Well, and Mick Jagger the Stones were invited. He was filming something in Australia.
Ned Kelly, filming Ned Kelly.
Ned Kelly, yeah. And Janis Joplin was invited, and she decided to be on the Dick Cavett show instead.
Bad move, Janis.
But her manager is apparently the one that convinced her. When you think about it, you're going to get more exposure on the Dick Cavett show.
That's right, because nobody thought this was going to turn out to be what it really was. It was just another concert venue.
Well, and you think about it, this is southern New York. This is not any place that anybody's even heard of. Although Jimi Hendrix apparently hung out in the area, and some other musical people. So apparently it has a history with music.
Yeah, it's not too far from a place where Bob Dylan
that's
had recorded with his group called The Band, and The Band is famous for going out on their own later. One of some of my favorite songs, like The Wait and The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down, and Up on Cripple Creek.
Yeah, because their album shortly around this time was Songs from Big Pink.
Yes,
it's still one of the greatest albums ever recorded. Those guys, it's Robbie Robertson and Levon Helm and lots of other folks.
It shall be a Levon.
That's absolutely right.
Levon Helm.
Well, and you can't miss his voice. Nobody sings like he did. That's for sure. May he rest in peace.
So that was all in this rural New York area too. So there was some familiarity with this area, but it was pretty much out in the middle of nowhere on a big farm
in Bethel, New York.
Yeah, and these guys said, "Well, okay, we're going to give this a try and have this concert out here. We're going to try and sell some advance tickets."
Right, they actually sold like 186,000 tickets through mail order and local record stores in the New York area.
How about that? Yeah, that's it's a totally different venue than concerts today.
Right. Yeah, there's no Ticketmaster.
Yeah,
there's no online.
Yeah, no Ticketmaster, no internet, and they sold it, and then they got almost to the time, and the contractors told them, "Well, you can have ticket booths, or you can have a stage, but not both." So they figured out, well, all right, we'll have the stage, and we'll just forget about selling any more tickets.
Right.
Yeah.
Which, you think you sold 186,000, and apparently there were two price levels. In today's money, it was equivalent of like $120, $170, the two levels. Yeah. So these are not cheap tickets for the day.
Right.
And they've sold 186,000. They sold millions of dollars worth of tickets in advance. Now, they also paid out a lot of money because they had to pay these acts.
Oh yeah, because they didn't get just your local bands.
Right.
You're getting some serious major stuff here. Some were on the rise and some were well known.
What they really missed out on, see, promoters today would be all over this, was concessions and pay toilets,
T-shirts.
Yeah, yeah. No swag. Can you imagine the swag the money they could have made? Oh my God,
$3 a piece for T-shirts, selling for $25 a head.
Right.
So, but the mythos then became a big deal. Again, like it's 400,000 people, but every boomer claims to have piled into a Volkswagen bus and driven, to
right. Who gets in a car and drives somewhere like that on a lark?
A car that doesn't work.
A car that doesn't work.
Let's drive 6 hours to Michigan in a car that doesn't work.
Exactly. Who does stuff like that?
There are precedents, gentlemen. Yes, there are precedents.
But what amazes me about when you talk about the era, you think about the hippie era, which really we think of the 60s for the hippie era, but really the hippie era is really Woodstock into the early 70s. That's really
that's when it
the
really...
true hippie era. But when you think about the 60s, free love and all that, what people think of is Woodstock. Those are the pictures they have in their head.
There's a progression that gets there, sort of. Sgt. Pepper's with the Beatles was a part of one of those changes. But that really, it's kind of like you're revving up, but you don't launch until Woodstock. And that's when...
Well, that's when it really explodes.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the Summer of Love, I think, is 67.
Yeah.
And Haight-Ashbury...
Which is ironic, considering the riots in Detroit in the summer, which I very nearly died from, because that's when I had my tracheotomy. Couldn't find a hospital to take me to because of all the riots.
Way back in the day.
Yeah, way back in the day. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
That's all right. History is often personal.
Yes, it is.
It's possible to have the mumps on VE Day.
Skip a bit, brother.
Sorry.
We've been
non sequiturs are.
Yeah,
great.
we've been laughing all day.
It's only 10
again. Would you like more gravy?
Some gravy with that. More gravy with that. Best question ever in a restaurant.
Yeah, and the answer, of course, is always
yes.
Oh goodness, we're off the rails now. Again, this moment, this peak of the counterculture. It's building in San Francisco. It's building in California. It's building in New York. But then it leads to, I think the next summer is Altamont. And the Hells Angels end up stabbing someone at the concert at Altamont. Not a good decision to ask the Hells Angels to be security.
Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. What could go wrong?
That's right.
And then I think the next summer is Manson.
Is he 71?
I believe Manson is 71.
Okay. Yeah. You're talking about these are all expressions of what was going on underneath, and a lot of that started here with Woodstock.
Well, I don't know. I think it explodes at Woodstock. I think it had to have been going on before, because where are all these VW buses that all these people are climbing to come from? I mean, this is a really... I think the culture is pretty well defined, but it doesn't have the touch point, the spark to make it go off the rails. Because really, I think, Martin, that's your point. This is where it has really gone. This is the starting point for going off the rails.
Right. It seems like at this point it's this super hopeful point. Peace, love. And again, no, there wasn't really violence. 400,000 people really did sit in the mud and smoke dope and listen to music and left each other alone for the most part.
Well, there was lots of sex going on. Let's make sure we...
Well, that's true. That. What was a whole lot of not leaving each other alone going on, too.
Right. Yeah.
But, anymore when you get 400,000 people in a spot, You're probably going to have tasers keep them apart.
Yeah, the police will be called in at some point or another.
Yeah, and
that didn't happen here.
Well,
generally speaking.
I mean, you could get 400,000 people together in a spot, but today we're so polarized that you could, it'd have to be either Democrats or Republicans, and even then, have to be certain kinds of Democrats or certain kinds of Republicans. You can't even have a broad mix even on one side of the political aisle anymore.
Which, for those who lived through it, went through it, and promoted the idea, they would claim that's kind of the point. This was it did what they wanted it to be, the summer of love, where we all got along. Yeah. I'm not sure how true it is, and how much of that's wishful thinking.
One of the interesting when you look at, especially in today's climate, you start taking these things into account. One of the things that is interesting about the '60s is that this counterculture mainstreams with the young, and what that really means is not just it's a white middle class movement.
Yes,
well, that's true.
Yes, and because think about it, white middle class kids and rich kids; those are the ones that can afford to drive across country,
right?
To come and do
or even drive across the state,
Yeah, because not everybody had cars like we do now. And when we think about that, it's only 50 years ago, but your family still unlikely had one car. Maybe your teenager had a beat-up car like a VW.
Right.
But, I got 4 cars because I got 4 adults in this house. I mean, I don't have 4 cars, but each one of us has our own car to drive.
Right.
That would have been unheard of.
Well, you're exactly right.
60s.
Yes, this is that's why they would find somebody that had one or could get a hold of one, and they came in groups, which kind of helped bring together
if you're going to do this, that's the only way to go.
Well,
I will admit that.
That's exactly right.
In a group.
It really adds to the mystique because it's a shared experience.
But if we go in a group now, we just whose car are we going to take?
Back true.
Then it would have been, Jimmy's got the van, so Jimmy's got to drive.
Exactly right. Somebody's got to drive. Where in the world can we pick up a car somewhere?
Right. So it is very much a white middle class cultural movement, which to me I find fascinating, which I think is why so many boomers like to claim it, because those kids were just like everybody else. They were from what would be considered normal, average families, and they had the wherewithal to be touched or to dialed into this movement, because this is before internet, before 500 channels on cable and 300 streaming services to go along with that. I mean, radio was how all information spread. And you still had to have the wherewithal and the time to do this stuff.
Yeah.
So this wasn't just a bunch of poor hippies getting together, a bunch of people on a commune.
It's a lot of college kids.
Yeah, a lot of college kids.
Of course, it's in August, so it's right before going back to school.
Last hurrah before you go back to college.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, and another we haven't mentioned, we have to remember that this is right smack dab in the middle of the Vietnam War.
Yes.
And that was part of that. And one of the reasons I think that Woodstock has looked upon with some scorn in some areas is very similar to what you say. You're talking about white middle class here. It's white upper middle class that we're doing all this.
The famous privilege.
The famous privilege, that's right. Because the poor folks are in a damn trench in Vietnam because they can't go to college. And, so there's a tension here between the nation that, would, in many respects, continue to explode during this time and for many years after.
And if you weren't in college, if you were poor,
that's right.
You either were in the army or you were working multiple jobs.
Well, see, we're talking about the draft. So, if you're of the right age, it's very likely that you're hunkered down or even killed in Vietnam at this point. And ironically, that's one of the things that these privileged individuals were supposedly protesting against. It's a little early for that, though.
Well, no, I think there's
some of it.
Yeah, because especially from the Tet Offensive forward, that's when the anti-war movement really takes off.
Right.
Because even though the Tet Offensive was not a loss, even though people think that, we kicked their butts, but it was the first time we were shocked by what they could do.
That's right. Well, yes,
and it was also on television. It was the first televised.
We're seeing the body bags.
Yeah.
We didn't see that before. That was always something that was,
or was a greater cause.
It brought the war directly to the streets of Saigon.
Yes.
In a way it hadn't been before, because like you said, it was a surprise, and they had infiltrated, and that's what made it seem like, okay, the war is now unwinnable. And you're right, it's kicking off that wave of protest. So I really like, Robert, what you brought up there about, yes, this is predominantly this upper middle class revolt from our parents kind of movement. And again, all of this free love counterculture movement is peaking. And I find fascinating where this ends up, and I'm not sure why. How do you go from 400,000 people sitting in the mud and smoking dope and getting along to Manson ordering his followers to go into a house and kill everybody that's in it? Well, it's 2 years later, and they all claim to be part of this same movement.
Well, but the Manson followers, though, that's such a small subset of a tiny portion. So it's not like you can say everybody at Woodstock was a Manson follower.
Right.
So
I would prefer... yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I got somewhere I was going with it. So I get how... And I think that's part of why it's hard to understand. How do you get from free love to we're going to murder this pregnant woman in her own home? But I think what you're seeing... Because, again, it's... I think it's no different than any other cult. And that is you get these same age people, they're young, they got time and a little bit of money compared to the those who can't get involved in this stuff. And there's drugs. There's almost always drugs involved. And that starts, especially when you think about the drugs back then, LSD, very mind-altering. This is stuff that, in ways bigger than normal drugs, alter your perceptions, make you much more susceptible.
Right, the long-term effects of LSD on your decision-making and your perceptions is kind of unknown at this time.
That's right.
Right.
And I will say, too, Manson was a master manipulator.
Yes.
He knew how to manipulate broken people.
Cult leaders always do.
Most of the girls that followed were, in their own words, castaways, thrown out by their families to a large degree. Now, that may be their perception, their exaggeration, but Squeaky
There's
Prom
probably
was
some of that.
I mean, she was a runaway, Squeaky Prom. So he knew what to do to manipulate them, to make them feel included, and in return, then they did whatever he asked.
He was in that way, he was a prototypical sexual predator.
Yeah.
Because, let's face it, any cult leader, it's always about sex.
He did. He manipulated all the women through sex.
Yeah.
That were part of the family.
Absolutely. Well, I'm thinking what you're probably trying to go towards here, maybe this is a better thing than Manson to explain the change. The Kent State Massacre is only less than a year from this point. And it's kind of the antithesis of what you're talking about, because you go in August of '69 from free love to students being shot on campus in May of the next year. And so, the
Kent State was in 70?
It was 70, yeah, exactly.
I think it was a little bit later.
May 4th, actually. So it's all that idea.
And it's definitely where the two cultures are smashing together.
That's exactly right.
The kids that can't go to college that are in the National Guard.
That's exactly right.
Looking at these, to their mind, these snot-nosed,
privileged kids
that are in college that ought to be in class,
right,
making the world better, thinking they're making the world better by standing around waving a sign.
That's right. Because they were so ginned up by the whole Woodstock moment. And think about it. The poor kids can't afford the freaking drugs, but the rich kids can.
Well, Forrest Gump is a great...
I was hoping we would get to that because it's a really good view of all this.
It is. So the big protest on the National Mall, Forrest Gump, he had just met with the president.
Yep.
Showed him his ass.
Medal of Honor around his neck. Yep.
Yeah. And he's just wandering around. He doesn't give a rat because he's just a goofus, a good goofus.
That's right. Yeah.
But he's essentially just a good guy. He does, but he's one of these guys though that didn't have money to go off and do this. Not that he probably would have, but this is not the character as he was written. But he shows up. And they're all excited because they got somebody in uniform to talk. And of course, the microphones go out when he talks.
That's exactly right. Abby Hoffman, man, that's just great, man. It's because he's the only one that hears it. Yeah,
exactly.
It's just awesome, man.
But they latch on to him.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a great, whether it's unintended or not, but it's a great illustration of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
They weren't full of soldiers, these protesters, because soldiers were off getting killed or killing others, or they were on manning bases, whatever. Because we didn't really have. It's not like we had 10 million guys in Vietnam.
No.
If we did, it would have been over in a week. But the thing is, though, just like a lot of countercultural protests, because every era has got some kind of countercultural protest. Sometimes it's small.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was big. It's getting big now. Mm-hmm. But in almost every case, the people who are protesting are not the ones who are affected by what's being protested.
It's the privileged.
It's the privileged. Protesting on behalf of others. Now, that's not always the case. Like,
sure.
A lot of the stuff you're seeing now is truly grassroots.
Right.
And that's great, because those, if you're not part of who's affected, you should defer to those who are. And far too often we don't see that. And I think you're seeing a lot of that.
That's just plain virtue signaling.
It is. And we still see a lot of virtue signaling.
That's correct, yeah.
If it doesn't affect you, then maybe you ought to stand aside and let...
And support, but you shouldn't be the leader.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily saying that's exactly what was going on in the 60s, but I think the 60s is such a great example of it.
It was very compressed in time, too. It was very noticeable to the culture that was around it. Yeah.
I mean, television, you had all kinds of big stuff going on. I mean, think about the 60s were a massive upheaval.
Right.
In so many ways. You had the death of a president.
Mm-hmm.
You had the death of his brother. You had the death of a civil rights leader. Mm-hmm. All within 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's multiple body blows to the American psyche.
Yeah,
it really is.
Vietnam itself was huge.
And in the middle of that, you've got the space race going on,
mm-hmm.
where we're finally shooting ahead of the Russians.
Yep.
After them kicking your ass in the late 50s, we start doing stuff and we finally get to the moon. And matter of fact, we get to the moon right before Woodstock.
Right.
So that happens
July
too.
69. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, 60s, it's hard for us to imagine in many ways the cultural upheaval that was going on. And when there's that kind of upheaval going on, I think some people, especially upper middle class folks that don't have, have to go join the army or be working all the time, they're looking for something to latch onto.
A search for meaning.
Exactly. Oh. A search for significance. Mm-hmm. That's why all the boomers claim to have been there. It's significant. It's a cultural touchstone.
It makes me matter. And that's in their mind. That's,
in a way, I think more is like, I want to be part of it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Part of the whole as opposed to I'm... Yeah, well, I think it's a subtle difference. I want to be part of something as opposed to, I'm significant because of, and camaraderie versus standing out.
And I think there's a contrast to the Gen X outlook, whereas you have the generation coming back from the war working very hard to rebuild a nation that has suffered, again, other body blows, the Depression and the war. And they're rebuilding the country. And the 50s are a time of general success.
Yes.
And there should have been this incredibly hopeful moment, but then there's just this, the boomers get unsatisfied, but I think the contrast to Gen X is we would recognize, okay, the generation before us has value. They rebuilt something. We don't understand what they went through. We're not going to rebel against them.
Well, and that's the thing. It's when you don't have any experience of the bad times, it's really hard to sympathize or understand those that did. It's very hard for somebody who grows up in the 50s, who was born anytime in that first half of the boomer generation, for them to truly understand what it meant to grow up during the Depression and World War II. Parents can talk about it all they want, but think about when your parents talk about the old days when you're a kid.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to listen to that.
Yeah, and it's not that the 50s were this incredibly rosy time.
No, I mean, people were scared to death.
There were issues in the 50s. Again, right, the Cold War's hanging over our heads, racial discrimination.
All that comes to a head.
Yeah.
Before we get to the 60s.
Yeah.
It starts to come to a head. It's not done, but it's where it starts.
And I think this boomer generation takes those flaws and says everything's horrible. It's like, no, wait a minute. Let's use our judgment a little bit more. Go back to 1936. Everything's really freaking horrible then.
Right.
Yes, there are problems right now, but we can solve them. There are people looking to really solve these problems. We don't need a full-scale rebellion to throw off everything.
Maybe it's easy for us to say that being who we are.
Yes.
Because you can apply something to that similarly today.
Yeah.
And because, a bunch of old white guys, it's easy for us to say, no, you don't need to tear everything down. Because from our perspective, things aren't bad.
Yeah.
But it's a whole different ballgame for other people.
Yeah.
So I get that whole wanting to tear things down. But again, I go back to, you're the wrong people crying about wanting to tear stuff down.
Yeah.
Well,
you've experienced nothing but privilege, and I get guilt. You might feel some guilt from that, but instead of rebellion, how about just being a positive force for change?
Well, I mean, because what was the change that they were advocating? I still don't quite... I mean, getting out of Vietnam, I suppose, that's what they would say.
That's probably the central thing that probably most of them would... Because it was the thing that affected people their age the most.
Right.
Getting out of Vietnam.
It was the air pollution that they couldn't escape. It was everywhere. And it colored everything around you. I get that, and we could have a lot of discussions about whether we shouldn't have been there or not. It was a result of fear. Whether it was true or not, we don't really know. The domino effect, and there were a lot of theories as to why we had to do what we did.
I think there's a lot of stuff going on as far as... I mean, not just the war. I think the war is the most visible. But when you think also about the cultural changes that have gone on. We don't think about it as much, but, the Beatnik movement in the 50s is the father or grandfather, depending on how you want to look at it, of the counterculture movement in the 60s.
Right.
So, same kind of thing. A bunch of weird kids and their weird music smoking dope. Mm-hmm. And it's essentially...
But indoors.
Not indoors.
Not in the mud.
Right. I'm talking about the thing in general.
But much of this is still privilege and privilege, right?
Well, yeah, because again, you've got the ability to do that.
That's right.
So it's not like this sort of thing is brand new, but all these kids that are coming of age, because the Beatniks are the ones who went to war and came back, and they're the ones who truly rejected all that was horrible. Because they actually participated in it.
Right. They're the Lieutenant Dans.
Yeah.
Essentially. The ones that go over there with great optimism and belief that we can do this, and all of a sudden, shit happens.
Or they're the ones who grew up in the middle of the Depression and the war, but missed it. Or maybe they were in Korea.
Well, I mean, when I say Lieutenant Dan, there's actually, think about it, his whole backstory in there is... all my ancestors went off and fought because that's what you do. And all of a sudden, his world is turned upside down because of that. He's the poster boy of that pre-war, well, of course, my ancestors all fought. I have to do that. And then you realize, well, what does fighting mean? What is war? It is hell, as William Tecumseh Sherman would say. And it becomes very real for many of that generation.
So, in addition to, transforming this beatnik culture... you get the pill in 61, 62, something like that.
Yes.
So free love has taken on a new meaning. It just doesn't mean, it doesn't matter if we sleep around. There's no consequences to sleeping around now. So... Well,
no birthing consequences. There are venereal disease consequences.
Yeah, but nobody ever worries about those.
That's very true.
That's great. That's not nearly as big a problem unless you get syphilis. As birthing a child.
Right.
Not that birthing children are a problem, but it's a whole other thing.
That's great.
Although that's a problem that does last at least 18 years. So there's a lot of things culturally that are going on as well, that allow this to happen. And again, to get the pill, it's upper middle, white middle class, upper middle class.
Correct.
All these things feed into this general dissatisfaction with the way your parents did things. And that's inevitable, but it's like a perfect storm of means, ability, and lack of consequences.
I think you've really hit it right on the head. There's so many things intersecting here that enable...
Yes, enable. That's a good way to put it.
That dissatisfaction with the way your parents did things to then balloon into something much larger.
Yeah.
And Francis, I think you were onto something too when you changed my, it ends at Manson to no, it ends at Kent State.
Yeah.
How do we get to Kent State?
Because ostensibly they both had the same reasoning behind them. Both were anti-war, at least tangentially.
Yeah.
Moments that are
but was
raised
Woodstock
up.
an anti-war movement?
It became that after the fact.
Well, that's after the fact. We often assign meaning after the fact,
and that's correct.
I think Woodstock really started out as what it was:
a rock concert.
Yeah, it was a way for a bunch of people to get together, smoke dope, have sex, and listen to music.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Which is not all bad.
Right.
No, I mean, it's very much
not all.
And I still go back to that sea change of Sgt. Pepper's, which was just 2 years ahead, previous to this, where all of a sudden rock and roll is now something very different. The hair gets a lot longer.
Yes.
And you get and all of a sudden drug use becomes more mainstreamed. I mean, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, for goodness sakes. Yeah. I mean, that's all of a sudden stuff that was underground before because. The Beatles early on, they were clean cut. They were clean cut, and that was now that they got big enough, they realized we're the Beatles, and I think Lennon had a lot to do with this. We can do this.
Or Yoko.
Well, this was pre-Yoko, 67.
I know. Yeah. We always like to assign
blame to Yoko. That's right.
For things that went wrong with the Beatles.
That's right. But that's a huge sea change.
That's a good point because even the Stones. And the Who, maybe not the Who because I think they were a little bit later, but even the Stones started out in suits and skinny ties.
That's correct. It was that was an image that was created, and it was Sgt. Pepper's that said, no, we're going to go in a different direction. And the Stones quickly followed because they released their Satanic Majesty's Request, which was like their faux album immediately thereafter with turbans and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, everything else changed. And all of a sudden, the hair is longer, the drug use is above board. Everybody knows they're doing
right,
that.
And the drugs are why the music is so different now. Why it's so good is
that's correct because guys like Sgt. Pepper's is a great example. George Harrison starts experimenting with a lot of this sitar music and things like that because they got all this gazillion dollars, so they can do what they want to. Well, they start getting very experimental, and then you have the rise of as the drug use gets going on. You have the Doors. And which they were famous for that, and the Who itself, my lord, of course Brian Jones dies during all this time from the Stones. So,
and there's Keith.
There's Keith. Yes, that's right. That's Keith. That's right. Okay. Somehow Keith Richards has managed to walk through all this unscathed. I mean, he looks like
not unscathed.
Yes, that's right. But still, the guy's still around, and it's he's
and I'm not a huge Beatles person, but
me either.
I do give them credit for. You're right. The switch is changed, and you go from sock hop style rock and roll to rock and roll that now can be open to anything, whether it's politics or personal angst or whatever.
Right.
It stopped cleansing itself for the radio.
Yeah.
There was no sanitization going on here anymore.
Right.
And because they were the Beatles, they were big enough, they knew they were going to sell. And they convinced all these others
again, this white middle class thing feeds this because I think what's going on, because I think this is when you're really seeing what we might call, at least as far as form, maybe not style, album rock, in the sense that you are no longer doing singles.
Yes, AOR.
For radio play. That's right.
You are doing an album, which is an event unto itself, like Sgt. Pepper's.
Sgt. Pepper's was one of the first ones to do that, and everything they did after that was done that. The White Album, Magical Mystery Tour, Abbey Road, all those things. That's just the Beatles.
It expands even beyond that. When you think about Tommy,
absolutely,
the rock opera,
Quadrophenia.
So. With that, you don't have to censor yourself for the radio anymore because your goal is not to get a single played on the radio.
Your
goal is to sell the album.
That's right.
So that in itself,
Which from a
again, you
cash
got to
flow
have some money to buy those.
Yeah.
Because, singles are a lot cheaper.
Yeah, singles.
The albums cost more. So again, you got to have money. It all, in many ways, it is the prototypical baby boomer problem. Because there's something I remember from 1984. There's an article about voters, baby boomer voters. They're supposed to be Democrats, right? Because they come out of that counterculture. Well, the article was about baby boomers who were voting for Reagan. And there's a great article about this one woman. She was mid-20s, I guess. So she's the tail end of, or maybe early 30s, but she's the tail end of the boomers.
So they're born in the early 60s then.
Yes. And her thing was, she wanted to vote for Mondale, but she recognized Reagan was the far better choice, especially monetarily for her. So she knew that Reagan was going to win, so she could vote for she could vote her conscience and still get her pocketbook, is the way she put it.
Yeah.
So, to me, that really epitomized the baby boomer
ability to sell out.
well, ability is, I was going to say two-facedness.
But that's kind
I
of the
mean,
same.
Orwellian, almost, doublethink.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you were going to pull that
Yeah.
out there because of the year this happened. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
again, it's a white middle class thing that's trying to find their significance.
Yeah.
Either because they want to be part of this cool group, or because they have sold out, or they're beginning that. Because the 80s is when the baby boomers really start to take places of position and power.
Right. Yeah. They come of age.
Yeah.
They become the yuppies.
Yeah. Yuppies are boomers.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right,
they go from sitting in the mud smoking dope to driving BMWs and going to the law firm.
Yeah.
Or
And
the advertising firm.
having ponytails.
Right.
Things
Yeah.
like that.
The kids who are at Kent State,
Yeah.
they're now in the law firms. They're the junior executives and things like that. Guys who are in the Army,
Yeah.
they don't get those kind of jobs. They're the guys that get thrown out of work when all the automotive factories get moved to Japan and
Right.
to Mexico and wherever else.
So correct me if I'm wrong, guys. We were talking in the show prep, and I asked Martin, I said, so is this going to be a takedown of the boomer generation? And he says, oh, absolutely. It doesn't sound like that's where we ended up with this. It sounds more like it's a takedown of the privileged.
A bit.
It is a bit.
We're attacking white privilege, it sounds like.
Well, we're attacking a particular expression of it, definitely.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
We're attacking the notion of, I have all these advantages, I could do something positive with them, but I've decided instead to pile into somebody's VW bus, drive to a farm in New York, and sit in the mud for 3 days.
So this is a critique.
but that's only a 3-day event, though. So,
Yeah, but you're forever changed by it in many
Well, you
ways.
are,
Your
yeah.
attitude is. So you're talking about, we're attacking the concept, essentially, of symbolism over substance.
oh, absolutely,
Yeah. Oh,
yes.
And that's kind of what I liked. I wanted to zero in on that.
Let me see if I can sum it up this way, and you can see a little bit of Martin's perspective on this. My parents, boomers. Dad was 45, Mom was 46. But
Early boomers.
early boomers.
Yeah, first year boomers.
But,
Whereas ours were pre.
yes,
Yeah,
1934, 1935 for me.
Yeah, 35,
neither
49.
of my folks had 2 quarters to rub together.
Mine either.
So, when my mother would talk about stuff like this, and we'd say, "What about the Beatles? Did you like the Beatles?" She's like, "We didn't have time for the Beatles. We were busy trying to eat."
Right.
So,
That is a great.
That's very well put.
and
Right.
that's,
right.
and that's my mom's background is, just every day is a struggle. There's no way we're gonna worry about any of this.
We don't
other.
have money to spend on albums.
Yeah, we don't have the mental energy to worry about Woodstock and all this other.
Or even what's on the
We've gotta
radio, it
eat.
sounds like, yeah.
We've got to get jobs and eat.
Right.
So
this is I love that line. That's such a wonderful illustration of what I've said before. And I think Woodstock in this free love BS is the beginning of what I'm going to talk about. And that is that when a society gets so affluent, that's what destroys the culture. Because you now have time to F up everything.
You have time to complain. Whether
you have time to complain. You have time to actually, do things like create a cancel culture where some snide remark you made 10 years ago, somebody captured on film, or you're a kid and gets captured and played back, and you lose your freaking scholarship because you didn't know any better. This kind of thing where nothing is forgivable. We are destroying ourselves primarily because we have created a culture of success and prosperity. And yes, I understand, not everybody has that success and prosperity. That's a given.
But overall,
yeah.
Because if you're not culturally prosperous, how do you even have the time to be a helicopter mom?
Yeah,
much less, send your kid on all these freaking travel teams and all this other BS. Send every kid you have off to college, whether they should be there or not, and learn all this BS. That the hippie counterculture kids are now the tenured professors teaching your kids.
Yep.
Interesting you say that, because you're totally spot on this, and yet, as you say, Martin, and I'll go scripture here: the poor you will have with you always. Mm-hmm. They're still here. They've never gone away. There are still tons of people for whom this entire concept of idea of affluence is offensive, because for some reason, their fault, their fault, our fault, nobody's fault, doesn't matter. They can't grab hold of that. And in the modern case, and I think the 60s is kind of where a lot of this started, they'll go into the drug culture now because there's buku money there. It's dangerous, but for the poor without any real future, it seems like a lifeline to affluence, because they're seeing everybody else.
No future.
Absolutely, it seems that. Again, it's a lie. There's no question it's a lie.
Being a believer in free will, are there systemic problems? Yeah. Can they be overcome? Yes. Make decisions that lead to success, not decisions that lead to hopelessness.
Well, and the drug culture is one of those easy off ramps early.
Yes.
Well, and part of again, it's easy for us to say that, make decisions that lead to success, not destruction. But the definition of success for me is different even from you guys.
Yeah.
Much less some poor kid, white, black, Hispanic, or whatever, in the inner city. Their definition of success is going to be a lot different, whether it's a lower one or just different. Success, unfortunately, this is part of that affluence
that's kind of prosperity where I'm going to. Yes,
is that success is far too often defined as stuff.
Exactly.
Material.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what's seen. And the only way to get that is money. And the only way to get money without actually being able to do anything.
Because our significance is tied up in the stuff that we have.
You got it. It's the
$400 tennis shoes.
It's the consumer culture, which has ironically brought about much of our affluence.
Yeah.
It's also bringing about these societal problems as well.
It does. You can make the argument that in some ways Marx is right about some of the economic inequities. But like a lot of people who are right about what's wrong, he's wrong about what needs to be done to make it right.
To fix it.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That famous...
That's Chesterton.
Yeah. He was a good diagnoser, but not very good of a prescriber.
Well, I think that's the problem, though. I think most people are very good at seeing the problem, but not understanding what needs to be done to fix it. And I include all the people that are trying to fix things today.
Yeah. It's a great part of the American makeup of somebody ought to do something, but you got to do the right something.
Oh, there's no question.
And that's, of course, what is the right something?
Action in and of itself is a morally neutral concept. It is not a moral good, inevitably.
Not inevitably.
Exactly.
It's got to be the right kind of action.
Precisely. That's right. So it does. There's a quality that has to be evaluated when it comes to that, as opposed to we've got to do something, or it can't get any. You know all that. Well, you can't get any worse.
Again, it's a great American impulse. We've got to do something.
But see
what
you said it different ways, and I think that illustrates unintentionally where things went wrong. First, you said something needs to, somebody ought to do something.
Yeah.
Some individual is the implication. to we've got to do something.
That's right.
All right. Now that's a subtle distinction, even though you meant probably exactly the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
We have gone from the individual needing to do something to society, meaning government. Needing to do something.
Yeah.
That's a very dangerous place to be ultimately.
Because in the main, problems like this, yes, they're fixable, but the solutions are difficult and they take time. And it's hard for one generation to see the results.
Right.
To really fix something long term, you often don't see the results of your actions. And that can be unfulfilling and
That's why so much of what gets done is a Band-Aid.
Yes.
Well, that's right. Because
where the long-term fix is bring your kids up right.
We can't think that way, though.
Get where your kids understand that, yes, making a living is great, but also make a life. And take care of your family and do whatever other private charity you can manage. And that really is the long-term solution to lots of things.
Right.
But you're right. You don't see that, so we've got to have government do something.
Well, because
there's a lot of stuff that government does need to do that it ignores.
Yeah.
For instance, just take this city where we live. We know that there are parts of this city that have been, for all intents and purposes, abandoned as far as making it better.
Yeah.
And every large city has them. I think we have a smaller segment of that than many do. I think we're very blessed that way. But it is very much the case, and we all know it. Certain parts of town, hey, Bosco, do not get their roads fixed. Mm-hmm. Certain parts of town do not have street cleaners come through. And that's still a thing because I've seen them.
Yep.
Not very often, not in my end of town. Not that I live in a bad end of town, but I live in an older part of town that is not considered the place to live. And we just know that this is true. For instance, just a great example of this, of diagnosing being good, but solutions being bad. Remember there was a Walmart that was going to go in downtown on Broadway a few years back. Mm-hmm. Not nobody. The players in the social justice movements didn't want it there. And you can have legitimate reasons not to want a Walmart to come in because they need to pay better. They need to stop relying on government to do some of the things that other businesses do. For instance, pay decent benefits for your full-time employees. Walmart makes a crap ton of money. They could afford to pay better. And that's fine. That's an argument you can make. You can also make the argument that people are willing to work for it, so why should I pay more? I think that's a very crass, bad argument to make. But anyways, one of the arguments against Walmart is it drives out all the small businesses, which is true.
That is true. That's correct.
But where they were going to put it, those small businesses went out of business years ago. This would have provided jobs. It would have provided a real place for people to get fresh food because there's going to be a marketplace for with groceries. But they didn't want it, and ultimately didn't go because they regulated it out of being able to come. You sticking around, dog? Yes, he is. We're in his mid-morning nap area in the atrium here.
Yes, in the atrium. Well, fellas, that was pretty good stuff. I think we're going to wrap up on there.
We're gonna end with the Walmart story? Okay.
Yeah.
I figured we'd go somewhere else after that.
I was trying to wrap up with my mom's anecdote, but you kept going with it. It was so good. I was like, well, let's just keep going. But we're at 50-some minutes, so I think we're.
And we thought this would be like a 30-minute episode.
Yeah, we thought this would be a short one, but.
But I think we need a good summation. I mean, at least a one-sentence summation, maybe.
It's complicated.
It's complicated. Okay, it's complicated.
Well, yeah, we knew that one.
The reason I say that is that I hate to end on the Walmart story, mainly because it's just an illustration of the bigger point that I think we're all trying to make here, is that, Woodstock may have been a fun thing, but what it represented, what it got turned into, ultimately led to a lot of bad things.
Yeah, this mythos of it, it's not sustainable. You're going to end up at Altamont. You're going to end up at Kent State because in the end, you're not really making good decisions.
And the freaks like Manson are going to take advantage of the fringes of the fringe movement.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
I mean, although wasn't really a fringe movement, but
But yeah, sitting in the mud smoking dope, I guess is fun. I don't know.
Maybe for 3 days. I mean, you saw a lot of good acts. If you were,
we didn't talk about any of the music. We probably should have, but look it up. There's lots of folks that you.
The music is unimportant.
Yeah, lots of names you know, lots of names you don't know.
Right. I mean, really, I think bigger names actually didn't show.
Right.
Yeah, the Who and Hendrix are the biggies.
I mean, Hendrix didn't play until 8:30 Monday morning.
Right. Yeah. I mean, Creedence Clearwater Revival was there. I mean, Crosby, Stills and Nash.
And it was a mess. The weather didn't cooperate. That's
no
why
bathrooms.
But so lots of the acts got deferred, and they played overnight. Janis Joplin played at 2 a.m. one morning. The Who played at 5 a.m. But the band, again we mentioned.
Oh yeah, the band was there. Absolutely,
so,
Levon
Crosby,
Helm.
Stills, and Nash played in the middle of the night. So, well, Francis, buddy, what is next?
We're going Code of Honor next. We've always come up with something cool to say. We've always got some sort of quotation out there. It's one of our most popular episodes. We have no idea what we're going to do when we start, and yet Robert the Hammer somehow always brings it back together, and we create, like a good blacksmith, a really great sword when we're finished. So please join us.
Hope you enjoyed another pointless discussion of eternal questions. Remember, new episodes published every Friday at noon Eastern.
Spread the word. We're on all the major podcast platforms. And leave us a comment or review because that helps others find us.
We're on Instagram, Twitter, as well as our website, snakesandotters.com.
I'm Martin.
And I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Join us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.